Zoom gives me like COVID PTSD. I haven't used it, so I update it.
Easy.
Dust it off.
Yeah.
All right, let's make a start, guys. Thank you very much, Nat, for joining us for our first webinar. Today's topic being the wellbeing advantage and what we can do to support our people in the modern workforce. Probably just some quick housekeeping before we get going. Obviously, everyone's on mute. We will have time for questions at the end. So within your chat feature and that on the Zoom platform, if you do have any questions, we will fire and I'll try and direct those at the end of the Zoom call for the guys in that to be able to answer, and hopefully we can squeeze in a couple of questions. Just making note that we do have basically 40 minutes. We'll try and really jump into the crux of what we're trying to discuss today and get hopefully some great outcomes in that with our presenters. Just introducing our guest speakers or our presenters today to the call. We do have Marnie Lishman. I'm sure you've all seen Marnie Lishman and that on Channel 9 News. She is a resident psychologist on there. Also best-selling author, keynote speaker, mother. The list goes on as well. So Marnie, if you just want to put your hand up, give everyone a bit of a wave. Thank you.
Good morning. Hello.
Cool. Second off the ranks, we have Tim Lawler. Tim's from Epi Group. Tim is Epi Group's WHS consultant and leader in that throughout the group, and also a thought leader in this health and safety space. So Tim's also a father as well. Tim, what are your other hobbies, bud?
Yeah, two boys. So that I'm just living vicariously through them now, just getting them to be better versions of me. That's pretty much my hobby.
Good, mate. Awesome. Good to hear. And lastly, Simplify's own Aidan Taliancic. Aidan is co-founder of Simplify, occupational therapist. He's also a leader or thought leader in this wellness space also. So Aidan, if you want to stick your hand up and say hello to everyone.
I've had a coffee. I'm good to go. We do have baby number 2 due next weekend, so a call from my fiance would be the only thing that takes me off this call. But hopefully we're safe for another week or so.
Awesome. Cheers, bud. Good to have you. Just to discuss that, basically the themes of today, we're sort of going to go into the IHS sort of landscape and how it's evolving that through these modern times. We'll quickly sort of touch on that on basically the reactive to proactive sort of models and what's happening in that within the corporate landscape. And also basically just sort of transition and that into sort of technology and how we're sort of seeing it effectively used in that in obviously the work landscapes also. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the session, guys. Aidan, I'm going to get you to kick things off. So basically, why are we even talking about wellbeing in the workplace now?
Well, it's a big question to start. I think we're getting to the point where it's almost impossible and also very irresponsible of organisations to not be caring a lot about this. And I think maybe in understanding why that's important, it's probably nice to go back and do a little bit of an overview of just how maybe the times that we're in now are really different to what we've gone through in the past. So without going too far back, if we shift our minds towards what was going on in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even sort of early 90s, it was very much sign up to your 40-hour work week, leave your baggage at home, do your job, and that was sort of it. Fast forward to today, and we're just dealing in a very, very different time. You've got needs and expectations of the modern workplace being a lot different to what they used to be. You've got millennials and Gen Z, for example, that now care a lot more about wellbeing benefits and upskilling and the reasons that they want to stay in an organisation or leave an organisation are really, really important. So we're getting to the point where if we can start to understand maybe how things were very different back then, and also if we look at sort of 70s, 80s, the population of workforces were also very different. So traditionally back then you had males doing full-time work. You had the majority of females doing full-time home mother duties. And we now know that that's very different. We're almost at parity, sort of 50% each, males and females in the workforce. Obviously, that's going to change a little bit with part-time compared to full-time work. So the things that brings all of a sudden is change in family dynamics and needing to share those different duties out, which all of a sudden means that things like flexibility are also really important. So I think when we start understanding just how different the times that we're in now, we can then start to wrap our head around why maybe even if we grew up doing one thing, that sticking our head in the sand and saying that's how we did it back then, it needs to be how we do it now, isn't maybe a great way to look at things. And then what we now know is the business case associated with wellbeing benefits and caring about your staff is now also really hard to ignore. So we know that it's not just a ticker box solution, and actually caring about your staff is a real performance strategy. The poor wellbeing is costing Australian organisations about $60 billion last time I checked. So it's a fairly decent reason in terms of dollar signs as to why organisations need to care about it. We've got rising costs of replacing employees, almost now up to 2.5 times their annual salary. So when we start looking at all of these different dynamics and mix those in with 4 generations in a workforce that all have different needs, wants, interests, goals, we can then start to figure out, okay, maybe what we were doing 5 years ago, 15, 30 years ago, needs to change quite a lot. And when we start mixing that in now with changes in workplace health and safety reforms, which I'm sure we'll get the expert Tim to talk about soon, it just makes it really hard to ignore. And the beauty is it's also where the opportunity lies. It's a real competitive advantage for those organisations that are doing it well. And we've all of us on here have probably seen organisations out there pioneering this and reaping the benefits of doing it well. But the flip side to that is we've probably also seen the opposite. And we're in a workplace now where the younger generations are voting with their feet, and there's lots of opportunity out there. So by the time they have one conversation with a friend on a weekend, there's a resignation letter on your desk on Monday. Whereas 30 years ago, maybe you worked through those issues with your line manager for 4 or 5 years. And even if they weren't solved, you probably stayed at your workplace. So just a really different time. But yeah, I'm sure Tim will talk a little bit more about maybe those compliance issues of why that's also really important.
Yeah, cool, Tim. Cheers for that insight there, Aidan. Tim, I'll throw it over to you, mate. Basically, what are you sort of seeing around sort of the workplace, well, obviously workplace health and safety reforms and that with the organisations that you're sort of obviously aligned with at the moment?
Well, thanks, mate. Yeah, so it's funny, like the need to do things from a compliance perspective from a health and safety law has always been there to do with wellbeing. We hear that a lot, particularly when I talk to regulators, state and federal regulators that I'm talking to, literally the conversation before this, that, you know, it's always been there, but it's a bit of a red herring when they say it's always been there, because we've also never had really much in the way of that enforcement. So yeah, it's always been there, but no one's really taken the mantle to actually enforce it. So the changes that we're seeing are significant because it actually puts more prescription to what's required. And that gives regulators something to go in with the stick with, you know, right? So that's, you know, when looking at the businesses that we work with in the organisations, I like to describe it as having 4 reasons why you should care about doing this stuff. And the first is the one that you actively communicate with your staff, is because it's the right thing to do. Now, whether as a leader that's something you actually believe in doesn't really matter. What you should do is communicate that. And that's just the frank discussions that I have with businesses. It doesn't matter if you care or not. You should care. But most of all, you should let everyone know that you care. And that might seem disingenuous, but, you know, you do have to fake it to make it in a lot of instances. The second reason, if the altruistic version isn't enough, stepping down is the business case for it in terms of the productivity. And we see different studies that have been brought out and different levels of businesses, that have different advantages. Bigger business tend to get more out of the dollar that they spend on it. Smaller business still get a good amount. Typically, the smaller businesses don't require the same level of spend to get things right. They typically have smaller working groups. People are more connected. That's what we tend to see. Coming down to the third level it's a risk management principle in terms of that if you prevent bad things from happening, you stop the costs that are involved with that and the downtimes and things. And potentially that's where you get an intersection with physical health and safety, particularly in high risk industries where psychosocial risk can have a massive impact on catastrophic events. And the fourth reason down the bottom is if that doesn't get you, then the fourth reason is, well, because you have to. So, that's the base case. So we never like to get there, but that's where it is. And that's, I guess, where when we work with organisations, we try to kind of elevate them up that scale in terms of the reasons why they do it. And we particularly like to move from traditional health and safety risk management is a do no harm mindset of like figure out what could go wrong and stop it from happening. In psychosocial risk management, we try to get people to go a little beyond that from do no harm to do good, because doing good is often easier to just get on with. And you'll find that when you do that, you're probably going to start reducing your risks in a lot of areas. So it is a different beast. There's a lot of fear amongst organisations that no one knows what to do and nothing we do is all right and people are all weird and therefore we can't do anything. And like the major structural things that you can do in an organisation that will impact a big majority of your business, don't worry about the fact that there's 2 or 3 people that might not help, like just get on with doing those things.
Yeah, very cool. It's obviously interesting, both points of view. Sort of Aidan, you've sort of highlighted basically on the business case and the benefits and that of sort of wellbeing, and Tim, you've sort of covered the landscape. Where do you sort of see both those areas sort of intersect around sort of workplace health and safety and wellbeing sort of, as we move into these times? Do you want to take that one away, Aidan, Tim?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think the interesting part is, like Tim alluded to, it's not the first time that we've had some sort of governance around wellbeing. I think it's incredibly messy, and I'm sure Tim's got a much better answer for this because this is what he does on a day-to-day. And there are a lot of people out there, especially smaller SME-sized businesses, that have no real idea of what psychosocial risk even is. So maybe before I even answer how they intersect, Tim, I know you might not have a perfect definition, or maybe you do. Can you just let people know that aren't necessarily HR or P&C gurus or org psychs, what they're having to care about, or what psychosocial risk even is? So in terms of before it wasn't legislated, now it obviously is. But on a real basic level, what is psychosocial risk that organisations now have a social responsibility to understand a lot better?
Yeah, I guess it's looking at factors, and the thing that's interesting about psychosocial risk is that we typically look at hazards, so things, potential sources of harm. But in psychosocial risk management, some of those sources of harm are actually protective factors when done well. So like poor organisational justice, for example, is something that can be really quite harmful as a structural thing, consistency and fairness. And that's where we would typically look at in businesses getting that right, like having clear processes that are actioned evenly across a business, so there's justice there. But so that when that's done really well, that actually can be quite a barrier, like a strength. Same as supervisor support. So that's indicated as something where if you've got poor supervisor support, that has pretty significant impacts to people's well-being. Not always, because people are all different, but when it's done really well, it can be a really positive influence in a workforce and can be a control mechanism that businesses use. So psychosocial risk is about analysing these factors that could be harmful if done poorly, but also could be really good benefits to your company and protective if done well. So working through those things.
Yeah,
cool.
that's great. I think, and he's explained exactly there just how maybe those two overlap. So when done really well, there's your benefit in itself. So not only are you ticking compliance boxes, but there's real ROI on doing those well and creating these safe environments, which is great. I know Tim alluded to the dollars and figures before, but I mean the latest research is anywhere from almost 2 to 8 to 10 times. Or you get $8 to $10 back for every dollar you spend on doing these things well. The issue is, what does doing these things well look like, and that's where there's quite a broad scope at the moment. But yeah, hopefully that gives people a much better understanding of just the benefits of really managing these risks and controls well.
Yeah, awesome. Cheers to that, guys. Marnie, I haven't forgot about you. We're going to bring you into the discussion right now. As an expert in the human element of wellbeing, and briefly this morning, I sort of touched on your recent article around basically you discussing the modern midlife crisis. What are you sort of seeing on an organisational level? What are sort of those 2 to 3 kind of problems that employees are kind of facing in the modern workplace these days?
Oh, and do I have to narrow it down to 2 or 3?
No. Make it as broad as you want.
Yeah. This is the beautiful thing about being a psychologist. We often hear the stories, the real vulnerable stories from individuals, but also groups. When I'm speaking to groups in organizations and there's no authority figures in the room, you really get to hear the struggles about and what people are really thinking. So yeah, it's great to be able to trap people and lock the door and hear all of that. So I guess some of the main themes that I'm seeing, people are feeling more stressed than ever. I think people are really exhausted. So whenever I ask people in a room, how are you feeling? Because obviously psychologists can't help myself. How are you feeling? They say exhausted, and they also say overwhelmed. So if you pull those apart a little bit, that's telling us a lot. I think a lot of people are really unfocused now on their work. And it's almost like people have got this pandemic hangover as well. So there's a very different psyche, I guess, between kind of pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, if we can call ourselves post-pandemic. I think people are still very much in a reactive state. So there's these rising demands, and I think the answer to that is just still to work harder, put in the longer hours, and obviously this is going to take a massive toll, isn't it, emotionally, physically, and mentally with people. So I think busy workers have more to do these days with less time, and that's going to flow on into their personal lives as well. So I think people are really struggling with that work-life balance. And kind of professional life is easing into personal life issues are easing into kind of professional life. And then there's just massive change constantly in organizations. So not only is the work-life balance a bit of a problem, is that everything is moving so quickly. Tech changes are exponential, aren't they? And people are trying to keep up with stuff. And then of course we're just getting disrupted, aren't we? Like pandemic disruptions, there's crises all over the world and they're all linking together, and we're absorbing all of that. So I think at the moment, I've totally narrowed it down to 2 or 3. I think that post-pandemic psyche is lots of change. People are fearful, they're feeling anxious, they're stressed, they're burnt out, and they're struggling to find the psychological capabilities to navigate all of that.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I sort of echo that, to be honest.
Thank you.
Sorry, do you want to jump into that?
If I can jump in, I think you've absolutely nailed it, Marnie. I find the pandemic trends I find really quite interesting, because for me, and from what I've observed, all it's done is really sped up trends that were probably already trending in that same direction. Yes. So if we look at rates of chronic disease, rates of addiction, rates of mental health, workplace compensation claims, levels of anxiety, stress, depression. Every single indication there was heading in that direction.
Yes.
And I think all that COVID has done is really just turn the dial up on that. And I think the reason being, especially for those over on the east coast of Australia and worldwide that had larger shutdowns, I think it was the first real time in a long time, if not ever in our lifetime, that a lot of us had time to take stock for a period of time, whether it's because we couldn't work or that it's this large macro thing happening where we actually had to take stock and audit what was going on in our life. And I think the underlying comments that I keep hearing from organizations, friends, colleagues, was that maybe the pace of work that we were trying to complete back then, or even just the pace of life, just seemed unbearable, and we really wanted to make changes going forward. So I think I find it really quite interesting how that pandemic hangover of what does that look like practically, and it's all of those things, and it's probably the reason why we're seeing more freelancers and more contractors and all of these different things where all of a sudden it's not just the 9 to 5 40-hour work week that people are willing to sign up for. They're wanting to really integrate work into their life. And I know somewhere along the line, I can't remember if it was even on some of the videos that you've got on our platform, you speak about work-life balance as life-work integration. Can you touch on that briefly?
Oh, but this is the thing, is like you said, like people are realizing, aren't they? Like, I think people have been struggling with that ridiculous workload, the unrealistic expectations, lack of support in organizations, so many things for so long. And yeah, we got massively disrupted, this global disruption that made us think really differently about what we actually need in life. So I think it's sometimes really bad things give us amazing opportunities that would never have happened if we just kept going on that kind of pathway. So I think people are realizing what they actually need to be their best selves in their personal life and their professional life. But there's no one size fits all approach, if not at all, for that. It is totally different. So for me to sit here and go, what is work-life balance? Like, what if I'm a small business? What even is that? So I think it is, really thinking about all the different elements that you need in your life to be your best self. And kind of integrating it the best you can right now, because it might change in a year. So it's like almost an evergreen model, isn't it? Where you have to kind of life is a box of chocolates. You've got to pick out what you need. You might have small kids and you need this right now for the next few years, but then it will change. So it is. It's just integrating what you need as a person, which it might be very different to the person that you normally would sit next to in the cubicle. Very different.
It's interesting you raise about freelancers as like someone. My wife's a freelance creative, and the demands from clients are worse than, when you talk about like when you're in a role as well, there's obligations for employers to try and protect people from things like that. But there's just no, like, freelancing, it's got a nice feel to it if you can manage that. But when the work comes in and the client says, I want this by Friday, there's no real protections other than your own ability to say no, which obviously doesn't. No, it's pretty hard to say that. You've got interest rates that are here and a husband giving you an elbow. No, so it's just endemic within that fast-paced lifestyle, and the demanding kind of things, is everywhere, in terms of contract workers as well as people who are employed.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. I think we're sort of going to shift, and hopefully there is a couple of business leaders and that on here, and not just sort of people leaders and sort of industry professionals. But if we sort of shift the focus towards basically sort of strategies and that for leaders around shifting the whole reactive firefighter solutions to more sort of proactive strategies and sort of factoring in, and we're talking about when we're dealing with sort of the generational needs of the workplace. What can those sort of leaders sort of take in that from, if we were to provide some small little anecdotes of success in that for a business in this day and age, what could they do? Marnie, do you want to jump into this one? Or Aidan? One of the both? Well, yeah.
Oh, well, I was just firstly thinking of, the culture, isn't it, is creating that really positive and empathic culture. So seeking to understand what the world looks like through the lens of your people, because that's valuable, very valuable information if you can understand what your people need to be their best, because that's the data, isn't it? And then of course, kind of those learning and development opportunities, but again, really thinking about there's no one size fits all approach. I think that's really important. Just to manage mental health issues and thinking about what workplaces can do to provide that psychologically healthy workplace for their people.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of leaders obviously giving their employees the autonomy, essentially, to be vulnerable. I suppose it's pretty much the word of 2024 and 25, and that, and as you said, creating that sort of safe psychosocial sort of workplace. Aidan, did you want to touch on that quickly?
Yeah, I think even in healthcare more broadly, there's been a shift happening for quite a while, and it's really picking up some steam in the last few years, where we're shifting from this reactive state of healthcare or wellbeing towards proactive. And what does that practically look like? So traditionally, that reactive model is a little bit more of, and I'm generalizing here, but it's a little bit more of, we care about your issue once you've got a really significant issue. And then if we look at what resources are available that look more at those things. So traditionally, you might be looking at EAP, employee assistance programs, that are especially larger organizations, I'm sure all have, and people that have worked in the industry have heard of for a really long time. And I'm not just going to come on here and bag out EAPs, because I work with some incredible psychologists, but it's also it's just working in a system that's probably set up to fail. So if we look at EAP support, which once again is access to psych support, if your organisation has an EAP provider, which if you get that support is fantastic. But there's a couple of important things that we need to note. So in the last 12 to 15 years, EAPs on average have had an engagement rate of between 3 and 5% in Australia. That might change a little bit depending on what provider you're with. So it's not a huge engagement of your workforce, and that can be seen as a good thing because there's not a lot of crisis. But what we do know is lots of people probably do need support, and it probably is a little bit higher than that 3% that are actually engaging. So the reason is, why aren't they engaging? And we know that there's issues around stigma associated to engaging in EAPs. We know that 80+% of workforces often don't know what wellbeing benefits they've actually got or have access to within those organisations. So what we're trying to do is come up with more proactive approaches to how can we empower, how can we give employees a voice, figure out what's important to them and what they want, but how can we empower employees to upskill themselves to be more confident to deal with challenging times in the future? Because we know life is really dynamic, and whether you're a first year new grad or whether you're the CEO of an organization, we're all the same. We're all just trying our best to deal with life, work, family, finances, still catching up with friends, dealing with newborn babies that I'll be going through in a few weeks' time again. And the reality is that's really, really difficult. And like Marnie alluded to before, what I need right now is completely different to what everyone on this call needs. And that's also completely different to likely what we all need in 6 weeks' time and in 16 weeks' time. We don't get to pick and choose when we feel stressed, overwhelmed, need to go on a health kick, need some financial education support because something's going on with a home loan, or so providing, there's a reason why proactive, preventive, early intervention is still gold standard treatment for almost every single health issue in the world. So if we understand and accept that that's the case, then the question should move towards more of how are we delivering that education to our employees. And that's where we're seeing quite a shift. And it's obviously part of the shift that we're trying to be a part of with Simplify. But it's more of, rather than just having laminated sheets on the wall telling us how to stretch, or just doing a 2D PowerPoint on resilience and getting a digital certificate, or just providing a fruit bowl, or having a wellbeing cupcakes once a year for a wellbeing day. How can we integrate a little bit more empowerment for employees and upskill them, when you can have all of a sudden this nice shared responsibility? I feel like there's been this real tug of war. We spoke about generations before. There's been this real tug of war between employers, especially old school employers, that are sitting there saying, I pay you to do your job, come in and do your job. And all of a sudden you've got employees that are really wanting their workforce to understand that they're human and they've got needs outside of work. And so it's important that the wellbeing benefits reflect what employees in the modern workplace are wanting. And that's where we're seeing this shift. And that doesn't just mean that we need digital education and digital wellbeing programs. Absolutely, we think that's really important. But what we also think is that needs to exist in a really robust wellbeing strategy, where you're ticking off the incredibly important things that Tim alluded to before. You're creating these psychologically safe work environments where employees actually feel like they can voice their concerns, where we can start to understand that our employees are also human. But at the same time, we can give them that flexibility, and they're still going to deliver some fantastic work for us. So I think if we start understanding sort of what reactive look like, then we can probably start wrapping our head around and having a better understanding of why this proactive wellbeing is even a term. What does it mean? And if we agree that, okay, this is probably how we should be tackling a lot of these issues, then the question becomes, as an organisation, what's the best way to try and tackle them? And that's where we don't have necessarily one perfect answer, but hopefully we can start shifting that conversation to more than just, here's some support once you've got a crisis issue that's probably going to result in a large leave of absence, the workers comp claim, or that person leaving your organisation altogether. There's this large gap in between where we think we can really provide some wellbeing education and proactively care, and not just say that we care about the organisations. Say that we care about our staff. Where we can, I think we can really start to make some inroads, and I think we are. I'd be interested to hear Tim's thoughts from that sort of workplace health and safety point of view. But yeah, hopefully organisations are starting to care a bit more about being proactive versus reactive. Anything to add there, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with these things. The biggest shift from a reactive to a proactive that we work with businesses on is to stop seeing wellbeing as an input, and saying that wellbeing is an outcome that people have, of which work is a large and big contributing component of that. Stop trying to think that you're going to make everyone happy, because you won't. So if you're going with that mindset, you're going to either do nothing or do things not very well. So start looking at those structural changes and things that are really important that you can do that will have a massive impact on the wellbeing of people in your businesses. Marnie mentioned it before, talking to people about it. It's a great idea, but you have to do it under law. So, consultation is a requirement for any risk management process. So, if you have to do it, why don't you do it well, So those things of just trying to reduce, I guess, the fear for leaders in a business that you've got to make everyone happy is not the outcome. Cupcakes on, Are You Okay Day. The biggest thing I say is keep doing that. Like, there is a bit of a shift to like kind of bash those things and say, oh, well, you're not doing anything else, and that's cool, but don't not do that for the sake of doing something else. Just keep doing that. Cupcakes make people happy. I see it like it's fine. Like, but you've got to have the substance underneath. So of the things that you are doing, and that you're when you're having the cupcakes, communicate with them. Hey, here's some things that we're implementing based on your feedback that we want to change to have some better outcomes for you guys. So for businesses, the number one thing that I hear from senior leaders when we engage in programs around this is that we tell them what we've been told by their people, and they freak out going, oh my God, like we can't come back and communicate that we've discovered that all this sucks, because everybody will be panicking. And I'm like, mate, the fact that you think that they're not talking about it is probably a bit of an issue, because if we're telling you, they're talking, mate. Like, it's so, just get on with it. So yeah, anyway, that's probably, that shift is just something that you don't need to be scared of. As a business, you don't need to make everybody happy. But there is a lot that we can do. So,
yeah, cool. Thank you very much, Nat, for everyone's input there. And sort of just rounding out our sort of last question today, we're sort of just going to jump into that technology space, and I'll sort of open the floor on that to Marnie, Tim, and Aidan. Obviously, technology offers many sort of wellbeing solutions and psychosocial solutions, but it also has downsides. So with that, how can businesses start to leverage technology to enhance employee wellbeing without contributing to burnout or privacy concerns?
Tim, do you want to kick us off? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's intrusive surveillance is actually one of the key psychosocial hazards that has been established by regulators as something. So when you start looking at technology, if you're monitoring your people's every keystroke and things on laptop, and then you're handing them a wellbeing platform, like you can tell how they're going to take that, right? Like they're going to be like, great, so now you want to understand what I'm doing at home too. And so like the use of technology, you've got to be really clear about things and what they're doing. And so that the technology though is getting better and better, because what it unlocks is a way to see what the issues are, but what the interactive effects are. And I think that's something that we'll see start to happen over the coming years, where we are starting to not only get data around specific hazards and things in businesses around psychosocial risk, but what the key ones are that actually interact with each other, that then business can go, well, I'm business XYZ, and I know those two hazards are the two most prevalent things we've identified, and hey, this has got really poor outcomes based on some of the data we're seeing. So finding out through technology if that's something that's prevalent in your business is really cool. So that trying to overcome honesty with your people and presenting what you get, trying to give as much back in terms of that information to your people. Certain things have to be de-identified, and you will have that, but if they feel like they're getting the whole truth back, then that goes a long way.
Yeah, really cool. Awesome. Aidan, did you want to quickly jump on that?
Yeah, I think something that comes up a lot for us, obviously we've got a digital health technology platform, wellbeing platform, and I think it's really important that in working with the customers and clients that we've got, that security factor, that privacy component is a real issue, and we know it is from end users, and it's something that we're really conscious of, and it's really important that not only that's communicated with from us to organizations if they're using our platform, but also it's really important that users understand exactly what we're doing with their information. I mean, the beauty, and we've built our platform on purpose the way that we have, where we don't have your deepest, darkest secrets on our platform, and everyone is really understanding of the engagement data that we are feeding back to leaders, and they're also really aware of, by law, just how anonymized that information has to be, because like Tim alluded to before, the last thing, and it'd be the downturn of our business very quickly if all of a sudden we start feeding back information to business leaders that are more specific to individual employees, and it's not what we're doing. But what we can do is actually leverage that data in an anonymized way that really can improve business outcomes. What does it look like from different genders or different age ranges? And what are those more popular videos? What are our survey results coming back as? Are we improving people's confidence to deal with challenging times in the future? And there's these bits of valuable data that we can feed back, whilst allowing people to comfortably go about their business on the platform and watch as many or as few videos as they want. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to meet people where they are and understand that we can get people comfortable in a platform where, when they may or may not need some support, that they've got really easy access to something, as opposed to we're enforcing this and all of a sudden you must watch all of these videos, and I'm ticking off who is and who isn't is just probably an old school way and just not the way to go about it.
Yeah, really cool, actually. Yeah, really good insights on that from both of you. Marnie, do you have anything to jump in on that as well? Otherwise, Marnie, yeah,
not really. Just about that. Yeah, it's a bit like the EAP. There's trust issues, even if organisations are quite overt about it being de-identified. I think that 3 to 5% uptake, a lot of that is actually about that, is the trust. So yeah, going forward, it's open communication and trust really needs to be there to
yeah, especially for business success and that moving forwards too, definitely.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you very much for today, and especially our panel, our audience, and that for taking time out of your day. If you do, what we might even do is, if you do have a question and you'd like to just type it into the chat section, we'll just got probably 3 or 4 minutes if you want to put something in there. If there's nothing in there within the next 30 seconds, we'll wrap up the session and everyone can be on their merry way.
Yeah, I think I'll add, just while people are doing that from a tech point of view, is it's understanding, like we said before, or like Tim alluded to, you definitely can't please every single person in your organization. But we know what the stats now are around, especially Gen Z and millennials, and I keep harping on about it, but they're, if not already, going to be more than half the workforce soon. And things need to be digital. So if you've got access to wellbeing benefits or programs, even if it's systems within your business that are 35 files deep in PDFs and articles, is simply not going to get used, and the research supports that. So when you're designing these structures, or if you're delivering PD events, these sorts of things, whether we like it or not, or whether you like tech or not, there's a large part of the workforce that's where they absorb most of their information. So if you are going to do something, it makes sense to try and do it in a way where you're going to get the best engagement. And I know that tech isn't every single person's best friend, but I know even some of us oldies are starting to wrap our head around exactly how we use it, and it's now just getting easier and easier to use. So I think, I think if it is something that from an organisational level you are looking at, then I think, especially from a wellbeing benefits point of view, people's attention spans are now not very long at all. So we need really engaging content. It needs to be done well, and you're very likely it needs to be digital, whether we like it or not.
Cool. Just to answer a couple of questions there, Lauren, this session will be available, or the recording will be available on that post session, and if you want to reach out, I'm pretty sure that we'll follow it up and send it out to obviously all the attendees today to distribute as they wish. Callum, just in answer to your question, Callum's just asked a question. What are the 3 strategies the panel have seen around culture that have had a significant impact on workplace wellbeing? Do you want to just take that one away? And
yeah, I'll just say one, and then I'll let the other guys have a go. I think what's most important, and this is going to be the success of any program you implement, not necessarily just a health and wellbeing program, but it's sort of twofold. It's until you can get or let employees have a voice, and that goes back to actually talking and asking your employees what they want, what's important to them, and what isn't. But if you are implementing these initiatives, wellbeing programs, the organisations that do very well that we work with, which is all I can talk about, are ones that build it into the cadence or the rhythm of the organization. And what I mean by that, it's just a fancy way of saying make it part of your day-to-day. So if you think that you can just plug in and play a platform like ours, and all of a sudden your employees get an email tomorrow and they welcome you to the Simplify organization or the platform, it's not going to go well. I can tell you that straight away. But all of a sudden, if you do have transparent communications with your employees and they are on board with what they're about to get access to, and our super users or our leaders of the organization are really understanding of what their responsibility is in amongst implementing in the rollout of this program, and they're using it for PD purposes, and they're building it into different strategies and initiatives within the organization, that's when we start seeing a much better opportunity to get better engagement and have much better outcomes. So that'd be the first one that I would say, is just finding ways to build it into the cadence of the organization and not just letting it be a set and forget. By all means, we understand that leaders are under the pump and they don't have an extra 5 hours a week to be spending on a different platform. But it's also your job. If you're rolling these things out, there's a responsibility there somewhere from leadership teams to champion these things from top down. Otherwise, very likely, like previous health and wellbeing platforms, you'll probably not be too impressed with what engagement looks like. But with a few very small tweaks, all of a sudden you can build that into the cadence, you can build that into the culture, and before you know it, you've got a much more robust 3 to 5 year plan that actually gets some outcomes and results.
Well, did you want to jump into the next one there, Marnie?
I think that's perfectly said. I don't have anything to add to that. I just think, the set and forget, the one-offs, the fly in, fly out, and all of that, it's not going to sustain anything. So I think that's perfectly said, what Aidan just mentioned.
Awesome. Tim?
Really agree with Aidan in that sense. I would add the things that the question being that what are the strategies that I've seen work is actually taking a strategy into it. So like a strategic mindset to these things is, where you do engage with people, you do analyze the key themes that come up that are specific to your business, and then worry about those ones and not everything. Consider, when the concept of work design and designing work for your people. And then another thing that's really important as a strategy is to really find out what you do well as a business that does produce good outcomes, because you do see businesses focus on the negative and then forget about nurturing the things that they do well. So, and those things, as I said, often may be what are your, we talk about that job that, we all had that job that you hated, but you stayed for the people, it's like, now we don't, you're probably starting at a pretty low base if you're entering a strategy, if that's what everyone thinks. But, that there is an element to that, is if people have really good relations, there's something to that. If there's relationships, you want to keep nurturing them. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And just sort of touching on that, Tim, and this sort of go into Kate's question, but sort of what have you sort of seen with regards to metrics, or the obviously best practice of metrics and then around that?
Yeah, so we look at a term, psychosocial safety climate, and there's some really good validated tools that are available to measure things. So they measure something that's actually worth measuring, and they do it reliably. So the concept of a climate, in which is the mood of your organization, which can be a physical thing, but in terms of psychosocial safety climate, they are really powerful indicators that you can use as a baseline. And then when you implement things, measuring again at frequencies that don't tire people out, but frequently enough so that you can actually gain some inputs that you can put your finger on what's working.
Yeah, definitely.
So that concept's a good place to start.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think just on the back of what Tim said, or whether that was Kate's question, I think actually having metrics is really important, and a strategy in itself. And I think it's been a bit of a bugbear of ours for a really long time. And I think health and wellbeing programs in particular have had a poor stigma for quite a while. And I think it's for that reason in particular. People get to the end of a year and they've got no idea as to how valid or what's the validity of that program? Has our wellbeing improved or not, or what did we measure? And for a long time, no one has really been able to answer those things. So that's one thing that I would encourage people is, when you are incorporating or designing some new initiatives around this space, just make sure you have some sort of metrics as to what that looks like. And often that's always going to be, there's different tools you can use, there's net promoter scores, there's all these different things, but somewhere along the line there's probably still going to need to be employee involvement there as to what that looks like.
Yeah, awesome guys. I think that's probably all we're going to have time for today, and we'll let everyone sort of get back to their jobs. But for those that joined us today, thank you so much, and hopefully there was some incredible insights from what we do know as an incredibly experienced panel on the couch and that today. So from us, thank you very much, and thank you to our panelists and that for joining us today, and have a good rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon.